I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth, as if honesty had cut me from the inside. The air was too sharp to swallow, yet I forced it down because silence was heavier. I thought rules were neutral until they pressed me flat for breathing my own truth. My chest ached like it had been trained to bow to an unseen weight, and still I obeyed. The controller once told me, safety lies inside obedience. But safety felt like a locked coffin. The paper wall gave me forms with boxes too small to hold my name, each letter a bruise. I signed anyway, believing it spared me chaos. The witness said, "You're quieter than your heartbeat allows," and I laughed to hide how right they were. My mask felt welded, not worn. Each ritual of shrinking, every apology rehearsed, kept me safe from exile, but buried me alive. Tonight I hear my younger self whisper, "You traded air for approval." I realize bargains can't be neutral when the cost is my breath. The first time I lied about who I was, it felt like swallowing broken glass, but nobody noticed the blood. My family applauded the neat version of me, trimmed to fit their expectations. I practiced being small until I no longer needed rehearsal. The mask became second nature, like breathing through a straw. Yet every time the controller praised my obedience, my lungs ached more. My younger self whispered warnings in dreams, but I woke pretending not to hear. The witness once told me, "You confuse silence with loyalty," and I laughed to cover the sting. My chest tightens each time the paper wall asks for a version of me that doesn't exist. I am starting to wonder if every nod of approval has been a tax on my breath. Tonight, I feel the crack widening. My truth is no longer a secret I can carry alone. Approval always came wrapped in rules. Don't speak too loud, don't correct the story, don't remind them of what they chose to forget. Each nod from the controller was a leash disguised as love. I told myself it was safer this way, that belonging mattered more than breath. But the more I obeyed, the more invisible I became. My younger self would tug at my sleeve in memory, reminding me of nights I begged to be chosen first. I pretended I couldn't feel her hand. The witness said, "Masks slip at the worst times," and I laughed because it sounded like prophecy. Tonight, the mask feels brittle, like glass in heat. I know one word, one breath of honesty might shatter it for good. I used to believe rules were carved in stone, immune to the mess of human breath. But tonight I saw them bend, not to truth but to power. The controller smiled as he told me the punishment was for my own good. I swallowed the sentence whole, too weary to spit it back. The paper wall recorded it all, as if I were just another statistic, my name miswritten. The witness shook her head, silent but sharp, knowing I was still too afraid to protest. My younger self screamed inside me, shaking the walls of my chest. I tried to calm her, but the lie burned hotter than comfort could reach. Silence felt heavier than defiance, yet I chose it still, one more time. It is strange how memory edits itself for survival. I once thought my wound was only mine, a private scar. But standing here, I feel the pressure of an entire chorus rehearsing my silence. The community whispers, "Keep it smooth, don't disturb the harmony." My mask smiles while my chest cracks beneath it. The controller nods approvingly, blind to the fracture. The witness watches, not intervening, letting me learn the cost myself. My younger self claws at the walls of my ribcage, demanding air, demanding space. I know now that bargains with silence are never neutral. Each one is signed in breath, and I am running out of mine. The mask began to slip without permission, edges cracking like glass left too long in fire. I tried to tighten it, but every smile trembled, every word shook. The controller's voice echoed, calm and cruel, "Strength lives in silence." My lungs rebelled, dragging air like rusted gears. The paper wall demanded another signature, but my hand stalled, pen heavy as iron. The witness eyes burned across memory, warning, "The fracture will not wait." My younger self tugged harder at my sleeve, whispering, "Choose breath this time." I wanted to obey, but fear coiled sharp in my chest. Each breath carried both danger and promise. Tonight I felt the weight of silence tip, no longer protection but a grave. My ribs ached like prison bars, and my voice pressed against them, restless, furious, alive. Morning crept in, but it brought no ease. The window leaked pale light across a table crowded with untouched cups, each one a relic of hesitation. I sat hollow, chest fluttering against the lie, lodged deep. The controller's praise lingered like poison, sweet but suffocating. My family's laughter replayed, a chorus celebrating a version of me that never existed. The witness words pressed again, loyalty is not silence. My younger self stood in shadow, clutching her stuffed toy, eyes accusing. I wanted to tell her I had tried, that I had survived, but the truth tangled sharp in my throat. Every nod I once mistook as belonging now cut like a blade. Dawn carried promise but also reckoning. My reflection in the glass looked foreign, a stranger rehearsed too well. Rules hummed in memory like chains dragged across stone. Don't question, don't protest, don't reveal. Each one carved into me like scripture disguised as care. The controller's gaze lingered, approving yet suffocating, binding me tighter. My mask quivered under heat, brittle and near breaking. The witness murmured in thought, truth shatters at the most inconvenient moment, and I knew she was right. My younger self pressed her palm hard against my chest, demanding release. I could feel the crack widen, each breath stretching the fracture until silence felt impossible. The air around me grew heavy, a storm, thickening. I sensed the moment approaching when one word, one raw syllable, might unravel the cage I'd lived in. The mask could not hold much longer, and neither could I. Justice was a theater, and I had been cast as the silent figure in the corner. The controller played his role with ease, smile carved sharp, voice dripping certainty. "This is for your good," he repeated, words hammering against my chest. The paper wall catalogued me, reducing me to another number inked wrong. The witness observed, disappointment heavy but unspoken, her silence louder than applause. My younger self screamed within me, pounding fists against ribs that bent but did not break. I swallowed her cry, but it scorched on the way down. Each beat of my heart clanged like a warning bell, louder than the silence I clung to. For the first time, I feared my own endurance. Even stone fractures under pressure, and I was not stone. The dining table overflowed with laughter, every voice polished smooth, every silence rehearsed. My family passed dishes with smiles, blind to the storm in my lungs. The controller nodded from his place, satisfied with the illusion. The witness' gaze caught mine across the noise, steady and knowing, her silence daring me to rise. My younger self screamed in memory, demanding I breathe, demanding I live. My mask smiled, but inside it cracked, fissures racing outward. Approval no longer felt like warmth, only a leash burning raw against skin. The community's chorus urged harmony, but it sounded like chains. Tonight, the fracture widened too far to ignore. My ribs strained, my chest thundered, my voice pressed forward, ready to betray the silence that buried me. The night cracked open with thunder, and I could no longer keep still. My silence pressed against my ribs sharp as broken glass. The controller's shadow loomed, reminding me of rules carved into bone. I trembled, but my younger self stood tall within me, whispering, "Speak before silence swallows you whole." My hand shook as I reached for the form I had once signed in obedience, ink smudged like a bruise. The witness' voice lingered, firm but gentle. Truth is heavier when carried alone. I inhaled, and the weight pressed back, fierce and unrelenting. My lungs burned, but this time I did not swallow the ache. I realized silence was never safety, only surrender. Tonight, I felt the fracture turn into fire. Morning light sliced across the table where my mask once rested, cracked beyond repair. My family's laughter echoed in memory, but it no longer tethered me. The controller's voice tried to anchor me with obedience, but it sounded hollow. My younger self's eyes shone fierce, no longer pleading but demanding I breathe for her. The witness' steady gaze reminded me I had never been invisible, only muted by fear. My chest heaved, lungs raw but alive. Each inhale felt like rebellion, each exhale a refusal. Approval had been my currency, but I was bankrupt and free. Silence had cost too much, and tonight I began to pay myself back in breath. Rules circled me like vultures, but their wings no longer silenced the storm in my chest. I stood unsteady yet unbroken, my breath ragged but mine. The controller's smile faltered, cracks showing in his calm. The paper wall loomed, demanding my compliance, but the pen slipped from my grip, falling silent on stone. The witness nodded once, recognition flickering in her eyes. Oh. My younger self clasped my hand tightly, no longer shadow but strength. Each inhale tasted like defiance, each exhale echoed louder than obedience. My voice trembled at the edge of release, but it was mine, raw and unfiltered. For the first time I was louder than the silence that caged me. The community gathered, voices weaving harmony that demanded my silence. Their smiles pressed like hands over my mouth. I felt the familiar tug to shrink, but my chest cracked wider. The controller's nod beckoned obedience, but it only fueled the fire. The witness's eyes pierced through the noise, urging me to choose air. My younger self's cry roared inside, fierce and insistent, live. My mask shattered with the sound of breath torn free, my voice breaking into the air, sharp and trembling but undeniable. Approval recoiled, but I did not falter. The silence that once held me safe dissolved into dust. I was no longer their quiet shape. Night stretched endless, but my lungs filled as if tasting freedom for the first time. Silence no longer clung, it shattered around me like glass. The controller's shadow faded, powerless against breath turned weapon. The paper wall towered still, but it no longer owned my name. The witness smiled faintly, not intervening but bearing witness to my rise. My younger self stood beside me, no longer frightened, her small hand warm in mine. I inhaled deeply, chest expanding without apology. Exhale fierce as storm winds. The mask lay broken at my feet, shards glinting. Approval could no longer chain me. Tonight, I chose breath over obedience, truth over silence, life over survival. Storm had passed, but its echo lived inside my chest. I walked through streets, washed clean by rain, every breath sharp but unchained. The controller's absence was louder than his command. His silence betrayed loss of power. The paper wall remained, tall and indifferent, yet I no longer bowed beneath it. My younger self skipped ahead, laughter echoing where fear once lived. The witness appeared in memory, her gaze steady, her words fulfilled. Truth waits for no permission. My ribs no longer felt like a cage, but a frame for something fragile and fierce. Breath tasted bitter with remnants of obedience, yet sweet in its rebellion. Tonight, I carried no mask, only air that belonged to me. The kitchen no longer felt like a cell, though shadows clung to its corners. I sat at the wooden table, cup warm between my hands, steam curling upward like a quiet anthem. The controller's voice no longer echoed here, only memory dissolving into distance. My family's praise no longer stung. It had become hollow applause for a play I refused to perform. The witness' eyes haunted me less, softened now by approval unspoken. My younger self sat across from me in vision, sipping tea with small, steady hands. She no longer begged, no longer screamed, only breathed with me. Each inhale was deliberate, each exhale a claim. Silence had lost its weight, belonging no longer required shrinking. The paper wall still towered, endless boxes waiting to cage me. I stood before it, pen in hand, but this time I did not bend. My signature no longer fit their mold, sprawling across the line like defiance etched in ink. The controller's shadow flickered in the corner, but his command no longer rooted me. The witness' voice echoed steady. The record holds truth if you write it yourself. My younger self watched proudly, eyes bright, stuffed toy tucked under arm. My lungs expanded, chest steady, no longer pressed flat. Silence would not sign for me again. Tonight, The page became mine, not their prison but my testament. The community gathered again, their voices weaving harmony meant to bind me. Yet I did not shrink. I let their chorus pass over me like distant thunder. My family's smiles pressed shallow, no longer commands. The controller's seat at the table was empty, his absence louder than his rule. The witness caught my gaze, a silent nod, her eyes reflecting relief. My younger self leaned against my side, no longer trembling, her laughter soft but fierce. My lungs ached, not with fear but with the fullness of air never rationed. Silence no longer held me hostage. I had returned its cost. My voice, quiet but unbroken, belonged to me. Night embraced me not as cage but as sky. I stood on the rooftop, stars breaking through ragged clouds, wind wrapping me in its raw hymn. The controller was gone, the paper wall distant, their weight no longer chained to my ribs. The witness' presence lingered, steady as constellations. My younger self stood beside me, stuffed toy loose in her hand, her gaze upward, fearless. My lungs stretched, each breath deep as ocean, free as storm. I whispered into the dark, not for approval but for release. The mask lay shattered in memory, its shards buried. Silence had been a coffin, breath became resurrection. Tonight, truth lived in my chest, untamed, undeniable, alive. The morning did not roar. It arrived softly, pale light threading through curtains. My chest rose steady, no longer dragged by obedience. The controller was gone, his voice reduced to a faint echo without power. The paper wall still loomed, but it no longer carried my breath as ransom. The witness memory lingered like quiet strength, her words etched permanent. You were never invisible. My younger self curled beside me in thought, her eyes calm, her toy held loosely. Silence once held me like a coffin, now it passed like smoke. I no longer feared air slipping free. I realized survival had been rehearsal, but life required risk. Each inhale carried no chains, only sky. I walked through the market, voices rising in color and noise. Once I would have shrunk, afraid to disturb harmony, but now I inhaled, letting sound flow through me without weight. The controller's rules no longer carved my posture. Paper walls boxes could not contain my name. It stretched wide across memory. The witness's gaze appeared in faces of strangers, reminders that silence was never loyalty. My younger self tugged at my sleeve playfully, no longer desperate, only curious. My lungs expanded, each breath proof of existence unbent. Survival had been a script, living was improvisation. I was no longer the echo of their design. The paper wall still summoned, its beige towers demanding. I stood before it one last time, pen steady in my hand. I did not fill their boxes, I wrote my name sprawling across empty space. No mold could hold it. The controller's shadow flickered, weak and fading. The witness's voice echoed steady, truth lives louder when written without apology. My younger self leaned close, watching the ink stretch bold. For the first time, my chest did not ache when I signed. Breath followed ink like a companion, not a sacrifice. Silence had taxed me too long. This was my ledger of defiance. The community gathered again, their voices weaving the old harmony. Once it strangled me, but now it brushed past like wind through open doors. I smiled, not with a mask, but with breath unbroken. The controller's seat remained empty, the paper wall forgotten. The witness stood near, eyes meeting mine with quiet pride. My younger self rested her head against my arm, steady and safe. Approval no longer cost air, it arrived freely, unasked. My chest expanded, full, unafraid of cracking. Silence did not vanish, but it no longer commanded. For the first time, belonging felt like choice, not cage. Night opened wide above me, stars scattered like scattered truths reclaimed. The rooftop carried wind, sharp but freeing, and I breathed without hesitation. The controller was a ghost, the paper wall a relic. The witness presence lingered like a constellation, steady and unblinking. My younger self laughed, releasing her stuffed toy into the air, fearless as it tumbled. My lungs filled, each inhale unburdened, each exhale a song of survival. Silence no longer haunted, it bowed to breath. The mask was gone, buried in memory. Tonight, I was not only alive, I was whole, carried by truth that no longer waited. Morning arrived with a gentleness I had never trusted, the kind that seeps slowly through curtains and refuses to be rushed. My chest rose and fell in quiet rhythm, no longer pulled thin by obedience. The controller was nothing but an echo, a phantom that could no longer cut into my breath. The paper wall remained, tall and orderly, but stripped of power. Its boxes only paper, not verdicts. The witness words hummed through memory, no longer warning but truth lived. You were never invisible. My younger self lay beside me in thought, toy slipping from her small hand, her smile soft and unscarred. For the first time I understood silence was not an enemy, but simply background noise. My lungs filled like open sails, wide and unafraid, carrying me toward a horizon no longer drawn by anyone else's hand. The streets pulsed with noise and color, alive in ways that once terrified me. I walked through it slowly, shoulders no longer bent, the air folding around me like harmless wind. Children shouted, vendors bargained, strangers brushed close, yet I no longer felt the need to shrink or vanish. The controller's absence was louder than his commands. Without him, the leash dissolved. The paper wall's grip could not reach me here. The witness voice returned as anchor. Silence is not loyalty. My younger self darted ahead in vision, laughter spilling like sunlight, her feet light with freedom. Each inhale steadied me, each exhale proclaimed I was no longer a ghost rehearsing survival. I had become presence, a voice among voices, not bowed but standing. I returned to the paper wall, not as prisoner but as witness. Its towers stretched higher than memory, beige upon beige, endless and suffocating. Yet, I did not flinch. I laid the pen on the desk, not as surrender, but as refusal to ever shrink myself again. I would not fit their boxes. I would not ration my breath to ink. The controller's face flickered faint in memory, brittle, his smile unraveling. The witness's voice pulsed through the silence. The record holds truth only if you write it yourself. My younger self pressed her small hand against the folders, her eyes bright with curiosity instead of fear. My lungs expanded, chest wide, truth steady. Breath no longer served silence, it commanded it. I walked away without signature, leaving their pages empty but my air full. The dining table filled again, voices rising in the old practiced harmony. Once, each word wrapped around my throat like a leash, but tonight I breathed freely, unbent. My family's laughter circled me, but it no longer pressed me small. The controller's chair sat empty, gathering dust and silence. The witness sat across, her steady gaze carrying no demand, only quiet pride. My younger self leaned against me in vision, stuffed toy abandoned, her eyes bright with calm. Approval had lost its cost, and belonging was no longer bought with breath. Every inhale stretched wide, every exhale affirmed presence unbroken. Silence still lingered at the table, but it was not mine. It belonged to the absence of power, not to me. I had returned its debt. The rooftop stretched wide, the night spilling stars across the sky like scattered truths reclaimed. I stood at its edge, the wind sharp but alive, and I inhaled deeply, unafraid. The controller had become a ghost with no voice, the paper wall, a relic too brittle to bind me. The witness lingered in constellations, her silent approval steady and eternal. My younger self stood beside me, stuffed toy no longer clutched but left behind, her small hands open to the sky. I filled my lungs until they ached with freedom, each inhale a song of survival, each exhale defiance turned into peace. The silence that once caged me bowed low, powerless. I was no longer a fragment, no longer rehearsing survival. I was whole, alive, and untamed. Dawn spilled across the horizon, not as enemy, but as invitation. I stood at the window, no longer bracing for rules to weigh me flat. The controller's memory lingered like ash, but it no longer burned. The paper wall had shrunk into irrelevance, brittle as abandoned scaffolding. The witness voice echoed, steady and true. "Breath was always yours." My younger self curled at my side in thought, her laughter soft, unscarred by silence. Each inhale stretched further than the last, ribs no longer cages but wings. I felt the fracture that once split me transform into space wide enough to hold truth. Silence, once my coffin, had become soil. From it, breath rose like a seed finally breaking into bloom. The city pulsed alive beneath noon light, its chaos no longer frightening but symphonic. I walked steady, shoulders straight, not to disappear but to exist. The controller's leash dissolved into absence, a silence I no longer mistook for safety. The paper wall's boxes felt laughably small beside the breadth of my breath. The witness's voice guided softly in memory. "Presence is not permission, it is birthright." My younger self darted among imagined crowds, her laughter threading into the noise without apology. My lungs expanded wide, pulling in color and sound without filter. Once I thought survival meant shrinking, but now I saw it clearly. Living was expansion, impossible to contain. The paper wall still loomed, towering in its endless order. But I faced it differently now. Its folders whispered of obedience, but I did not bow. I traced my name boldly across a blank sheet, sprawling beyond their borders. The controller's ghost flickered faint, powerless. The witness' gaze rose in memory, her silence heavy with approval. My younger self leaned close, her small hand steady on mine, no longer trembling. Breath surged steady, carrying truth into the room where silence once dictated. I turned from their archive with lungs wide, leaving their boxes empty, but my air unbroken. Survival had chained me here, but freedom carried me out. At the family table, voices wove harmony still, but it no longer cut. I sat centered, no mask, no shrinking. Their laughter washed past me, harmless as wind. The controller's seat remained empty, its absence louder than his presence. The witness sat across, her eyes calm, reflecting relief. My younger self leaned against my shoulder, toy forgotten, her breath steady. I realized approval was never belonging, only transaction, and I no longer owed debt. Each inhale rooted me deeper, each exhale stretched freer. Silence lingered around us, but not mine. It belonged to the void left by broken control. I had chosen breath, and it had chosen me back. Night stretched infinite, stars scattered like truths untamed. I stood on the rooftop, wind pulling at my coat, lungs filling deep with air no longer rationed. The controller was gone, the paper wall forgotten relic, the witness steady as constellation. My younger self stood beside me, no longer clutching her toy, hands open to the night. Breath poured through me like ocean tide, each inhale alive with freedom, each exhale carved with release. Silence bowed low, its power dissolved. My chest, once prison, had become cathedral. I whispered into the sky, not for approval but for truth, and the stars answered with stillness that was not empty but vast. I was no longer surviving, I was infinite.